Hey everybody, Robert with RC Archery. In today's Tuesday's tip of the week, number 87, we're going to be looking at hinge releases. So indoor season is upon us and hunting season is winding down. And a lot of archers in our local range and a lot of archers on Instagram have been messaging me and talking to me about switching to hinge releases. Maybe you're trying to get rid of some bad habits you've developed through hunting season with a thumb button or a wrist release, index release. Or maybe you're just looking at trying to adjust your shot pattern and what you're doing with your process and trying to look for maybe some better scores or better grouping. A lot of people are looking towards these and they're timid or afraid of setting them up, getting hurt, or when they go to shoot them, they're noticing that their scores and their groups are really degressing and becoming worse. So we're going to talk about briefly how to set them up, and then some different ways to shoot them and use them today in order to help you be most accurate and get the most benefit out of these releases. All right, so if you're not super familiar with a hinge or what some people refer to as a back tension release, I'm gonna quickly go over the function of them, how they work, and why they have their name and all that good stuff. So with the hinge release itself, it's called a hinge because there is something that resembles the shape of a half moon inside and a lever that rides across that till it gets to the edge and it trips and it opens. What you're having to do from an aspect of an archer is you actually have to go through and rotate these releases in order to get them to fire. So the way that they've come about being called back tension releases is because a lot of people use these as a means to using their back to pull their arm rearward. And when you do that from this direction, you'll notice that a lot of the times you pull your elbow around behind you, and that is rotating the release and causing it to fire. It's really simplistic. You don't have to pull through the shot. You don't have to rotate your elbow. You don't have to shoot a release that way. But that is a way that a lot of people get started and what they're looking at. And honestly, it takes the anxiety of having a trigger away, and it takes a whole new shot concept if you're used to an index release, and allows you to rebuild and recreate your shot process. And that helps a lot of people when they have target panic symptoms to reestablish what they're doing and refocus. So for today, I'm going to go over some basics on how to shoot this release and how to set it up, and that's what's going to help us the most. Where a lot of people start to create problems for themselves when it comes to using these hinge releases is they are afraid of punching themselves in the face. So they're afraid of it having too much rotation too soon while you're drawing the bow back, and then that release firing and it coming back and you popping yourself in the mouth with one of these. So I have seen that happen. I have had some misfires with these over the years. It can happen, especially if you're just getting lazy with them or maybe you don't understand how to use them. So I'm going to help you take the anxiety out and make it a lot safer for you to learn what you're doing with these. The first thing that I recommend for everybody when you're setting up a hinge is find the speed setting on the moon itself and slow it down all the way. Because what we're wanting to do when we first start with these releases is just get comfortable drawing them back, getting into our anchor. Maybe we need to adjust our peep height. Maybe we need a different loop length, getting all of that sorted out and starting a new motor pattern to be able to get our bow back to full draw, and then also letting the bow back down so that you are not worried about using these. When we're drawing these back, there's a couple different thoughts on how to handle this. Some people believe that you want to have pretty even tension across all fingers and use this thumb, or maybe not use this thumb, and draw it back. Some people think they only want tension on their index and their thumb. You can do this either way, however you feel comfortable. What I normally recommend with people is the majority of the tension on my hand and what I'm doing when I draw them back is on my index and my thumb, but I also like to have some tension on the outer fingers as I'm drawing it back, but I am using that index. Super safe that way. You never have to worry about it going off on you, and it's really easy to get yourself comfortable with drawing it back and getting into full draw. From here, where people start to contain issues is the adjustment and the speed of the release after they're comfortable with it and start speeding the release up. A lot of people have problems firing these hinges, and it's called hanging up. And what they'll start doing is they'll speed the release up and make it need less rotation in order to fire the release, and then their problem gets worse and they speed it up again, and then it continues to get worse. And the reason that is happening is because you have too much pressure on the index and not enough on these outer fingers. So what I would say and recommend is have a shot trainer or create one out of a piece of string. It's super simple to do. You just take a piece of string and tie it in a knot with a loop. Try to get it as close to your draw length plus your loop length as possible so that you can have a similar feel to what you do with your bow, and get used to drawing this back with a relaxed index finger. So we don't want the release in your hand to be so relaxed that it's sliding out like this. We want to be able to have this good, what they call a J hook set up on your hand, where the release is in the middle part of our finger pads right in here. You may like that in different places. The further and deeper you get it into your hand, the slower the release will react. The further and closer it gets to your fingertips, the little bit faster that release will react with the same speed setting. Try to get it pretty comfortable in the middle. But as we're drawing this back, if we are relaxed in the index finger, it creates a platform for us that once we get to full draw, we can transfer the weight into our outer fingers on this release and settle in and build tension on our back wall until it gets to a click. And if you don't want to use a click, perfectly okay. I recommend it as a starting point. For me, I want that click to happen as I'm coming off the thumb peg, balancing some weight out on my fingers. I still want the majority of the tension on my index, but I want it to feed and bleed into the second and third fingers so that they're engaged, because whenever release execution method you decide to use, if the outer fingers aren't engaged, then that release will not rotate and you will not see any success with having a hinge. So for me, I use that click as a starting point. I get into full draw, I get here and anchor, and then that's when I get to my click. From this point, I have a consistent spot that I can micro adjust and fine tune the speed until I have it going off when I want it to. And again, a lot of different ways. We'll go into that in the second part of this video. But when we're working that speed setting, get it to where you can comfortably, with a relaxed index finger and not a ton of pressure on these outer fingers, get into anchor, come off the thumb peg, balance out just a little, and get into that click. And that'll be the starting point for your adjustment. When you are shooting, and as you're working on this, if your release is set too fast or too slow, you can notice that you get some different variances on target. Usually for me, if a release is set too fast, my hand wants to pop away from my face and I'll get some left misses. And if it's set too slow, I'm digging my hand into my face too much and rotating and pulling too hard, and that will cause me to have some right misses on target. So just kind of a general guideline when you're looking at setting up your speed and getting the overall adjustment of your hinge set up for you. As I said before, there's a lot of different ways you can shoot these hinge releases. I'm going to give you a few generalized that you can build off of and use and try to adapt and see what works best for you. Everybody's a little different when it comes to release execution. Some people really like to have this release in their hand, not move at all, and just pull and work that release and open it up here as they're pulling through. That is absolutely okay if you want to do it that way. Some people like to press their outer fingers to where they're using it as a focal point to pull it back, maybe back behind them, back into their wrist, into their elbow, something along those lines. Some people like to physically start curling their fingers and rotating that release. And then some people like to actually start holding tension on here and then relaxing the index and allowing the hand to open up, and then that rotates the release as well. Any of those methods work extremely well for an archer, and if you want to do any of those and it works for your brain and you're seeing what you need on target, go for it. Some pluses and minuses that I see is when we're relaxing this index finger and letting the hand maybe stretch out and open. So you may be starting it with a little bit of a bend here in our base knuckles and then allowing that hand to stretch and open up. And when you do that, you'll notice that it actually will start to pull this release and rotate it and it'll fire it. When you're using this method, you have to have the bow set up correctly to where you're not going to come off the back wall. You need good tension where you're holding it with your shoulder blades, holding it with your back, focusing on keeping that bow firm against the back wall. And then you also need to make sure that your stabilizers are weighted correctly. If you have too much of a front weighted stabilizer basis and you start relaxing, you're gonna get a lot of dip bangs and a lot of problems. When you are using a method to where you're pulling in or curling of the fingers, or even just pulling through the release, you're gonna wanna set up the stabilizers where maybe you have a little bit more front weight on them, to where when you're pulling, it's a dynamic system and the bow will steady itself up and it'll keep it from rising up out of the target. A lot of people get in trouble here. They see the bow moving, they relax, it starts to drop on target, then they lessen the front weight and it creates a bad circle of, you know, just doing the opposite of what you need to do. So keep that in mind. Now I've got a couple different style of releases here. I have a 3-finger here, and then I have a fulcrum flex from TrueBall that I've created as a 2-finger. For me, when I'm using a hinge release, I'm looking at this as a leverage standpoint. The more fingers you add to the end of the release, the more leverage you have over it, the little bit easier it'll rotate and you can work through it, but it's also easier to torque that release and create some left and right variances and some problems. So I really enjoy shooting a 2-finger hinge, but everybody is different. The most popular is a 3-finger. But it's really cool with these new TrueBall releases. Most of them have what they call the flex system, to where you can shoot it as a 2-finger, 3, or a 4. You can test all that out and see what you like. One other thing that I wanted to go over really quick, since I have this fulcrum flex here, you notice on this one you can actually adjust the head of this release and make it further over the index or closer towards the middle finger. Where the head sits on a release, especially a hinge release, determines a lot of how that release is going to feel and what is going to work best with it with your setup and when you're using it. The more over the index this release and this hook is, the more that this will freely rotate in your hand and want to rotate through the shot easier for you. The more it's closer to the middle finger, the more you're going to have to induce movement into it in some form or fashion. Now when you're drawing the head of that release being more over the index finger, it's going to require you to be a little bit more careful to draw it. It will definitely rotate easier. It's more sensitive to the outer pressures on the release with your outer fingers. And then the more it's closer to your middle finger, the less it's going to be sensitive to these outer pressure on your fingers. And the easier, I guess, it'll be to draw this release back. You'll notice with like the Ultra View Hinge 2, the release hook point is way off to the middle finger. And they will talk to you about how it's easy to draw it weighted with all your fingers on the release. You don't have to worry about it going off as much. It'll be, in that platform, and it definitely is. But I think it's also finding that balance and finding out what you like the best. So earlier we were talking about with the release, being really relaxed on our index finger when we're drawing it. And the reason we want to do that is because as we're actually working through this release, even if you go to pull straight through, if that release finger on your index is loose and soft, you will start to pull against it no matter what you do. So we don't want to be really firm and really tight with that index like we were talking about earlier in any method that we choose, because when you do that, your whole hand gets tense. And you'll notice here when I go to pull that I can pull really hard and nothing's going to happen because there's too much pressure on this index finger. But if I relax that index and I start to pull and let it stretch out, you can see that my hand will move and give. And then if I set this up with enough tension on the outer fingers, as that index starts to give, my middle finger is taking it over, and then it allows it to fire. It's the same thing if we want to use a relaxation method through the shot to where we have a little bit of tension built up in our back knuckles even. As long as we have that index pretty soft on here and we start to pull through, that index being soft allows our entire hand to be soft. And if we're not soft in through here in this little horseshoe, then you're just going to fight a hinge release all day long. So you can see here that when I'm soft in this method right now, that my hand, as I start to pull, will just relax and stretch. And it works really well that way. Same thing, if I'm going to
rotate through this release or focus on pulling an outer finger into my palm or through the release. If my index is really tense and I go to try to rotate these fingers and turn it, it's gonna require more effort to fire. Now, if I'm soft on the index and then I go to rotate through on my outer finger or pull through like that, it's a lot easier. It takes less force. So where a lot of people get in trouble is they're too tense on this index finger and it's curled around it and it's really hard versus just relaxed. And you can actually see that if you look at my hand. If I tense up this index, you can see that it makes this part of my hand very tense. But when I relax that index, this part of my hand relaxes as well. And that's what we're looking for when it comes to a hinge release.
All right, everybody, if you don't follow me on Instagram, check me out there. It's RC Archery, just like the channel name here. I am hosting with another archer a local shoot. It's a Vegas round shoot. We're using that as like a Vegas and a Lancaster warm up. It's gonna be a 330 scoring Vegas round. So meaning the X will be 11s. We're gonna have a qualification 30 arrow round, and then we're gonna roll right into some shoot offs. So we've got a full line virtually already set up for this. We're gonna go live. I'm gonna have Alvarado Archery is who we're hosting it with. They're gonna have their Facebook and Instagram live pages going live, so follow them. And then on my Instagram page, I will be live as well. We're doing some interviews where we're going over equipment with other archers, what they're shooting, how they're working through their shot, all little things like that that we can talk to them about. And then we'll also be showing all of the shoot downs and going through with some different camera views, maybe where we can watch archers shooting down range and some different stuff like that. So should be a lot of fun. That is coming up this Saturday from when you're watching the video, if you're watching it live, and that will be on my Instagram account. If you are a member of this channel, our video this week will be going over some issues that you may have with a setup on your bow that is causing you to hang up when you're using an a hinge style release. Maybe you're hanging up with your index because of the way you're setting the bow up, or maybe you're just fighting the bow because of some different areas too. Also keep an eye out for our YouTube shorts. It'll be coming out on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll be doing some hinge focused YouTube shorts on there as well. Appreciate everybody for watching today. Happy New Year's. We had a couple weeks off from the channel, so I do apologize for that, but I did take a little bit of a break during the holiday season to just hang out and also get some shooting done with my bow and kind of get myself dialed in for this indoor season and upcoming 3D season. Thank you guys again. I'll see you soon.